What is liberty? Well, today I'm going to make a audio blog again in English. Sorry to my German listeners, because I want to talk about this to an international audience if possible. Either way, what is liberty and how important is liberty? Oh boy, that's such a vast topic, but I think in recent times it is something we really need to talk about and look at from several new angles. At first, to ask yourself what is the meaning of liberty, one thing you can ask yourself, of course, is, well, what is the opposite of liberty? Somehow you can clarify your own mind and your own views about a topic or an idea if you ask yourself what would the absence of it be. So if you have no freedoms, if your liberty is limited, so what is the opposite of liberty? And the one thing that always comes to my mind, the opposite of liberty, is authority. Authority. Liberty is when you yourself, out of your own reason, out of your own thinking, and out of your own conscience, are free to decide. And the opposite is, of course, naturally, if someone else is in authority, if someone else is telling you what to do, if someone else is telling you what to think and what to believe and what is right. Now, mind you, I am really not a preacher of anarchy and extreme libertarianism, though I am to a certain degree libertarian. I do think there need to be laws, I do think there need to be police, I do think there needs to be a government, because there is something I really need to tell about to you anarchists or extreme libertarians out there. Just taking away power from the government, from the police, is not more liberty, because the reality is, how shall I explain it? Power does not allow a vacuum. Power does not vanish. There are always people who are more powerful than you. They have the bigger muscles than you. They have the better organization behind themselves. They have money. They have guns. I don't know, whatever form, or they are more persuasive of you. Even the ability to persuade others is a great power. Much underappreciated. All these things are power which you cannot just take away. So there is much more power and authority than just the law, than just the government and the police. Of course, under our circumstances, as we live in a modern society, the government is probably maybe still the most powerful singular group or system that we are confronted with. But there already is a very great second power, which in some cases, or some may argue, is even the first power, and that is the power of money. The people who control money, or simply said, the people who are very rich, organized, and who are the, I don't know, top 2%, 4%, however you want to put it, who are the most richest people in the world. They are part of a system which has tremendous power. So for me, if I say I want a society of more liberty, just taking the powers away from the government would not solve anything, because if we dismantle a government or reduce it to a point where it is absolutely unable to do anything anymore, it would mean other powers would step into this place. That is a big dilemma, because that is why there is no simple answer, why, like many libertarians say, by just saying, oh, let's take the power away from the evil government and we all shall be free. Or that's honestly not so much libertarianism, that's almost anarchy. The result would be falling back into a sort of caveman existence, where the rule of the mob, the rule of the strongest, the boss leader of a crime organization, or in our modern case, the power of big companies, of banks. So there is not such a simple answer to this. Now, of course, we all want liberty and to have as much personal freedom as possible. Now, the tricky question is, let's bend it down to a more simple level. authority. I think all of us, the longer you live, the more so, we have faced figures of authority. Now there are more or less two different kinds of authority. The authority because someone is in an office of any sorts, and the authority that comes from, let's say, charisma. Someone who can speak so well that others follow him, that others are convinced that he speaks the right way. These latter are, for instance, religious extremists, whether it be Islamist extremists or Christian extremists or political extremists, just the same. People who are often do not have an office, or they may have an office, but the office itself is not the thing that gives them the influence, the power, the authority, but their ability to speak. And of course also their connections. They know people who know people who know people who do things his way. If you take one person who absolutely excelled, shall we say, even so being an evil person, was of course Adolf Hitler, because he started as a nobody, an unemployed, homeless nobody, and he had no connections, no money, nothing whatsoever, and his ability was, at least for what people expected in his time, his ability to speak. His gift as an orator. And now this is a sort of authority that is one very important authority. And the other authority in our days, of course, is authority via an office, because someone is a prime minister, someone is a chancellor, that's the top level of a president, that is the top level of authority. But of course, going to a simple a tax office, a customs office, and all the way down to your gardening club. And the one thing, I've been in groups, in clubs, in organizations of all sorts, political organizations, religious organizations, private interest club, philosophy clubs, anything, student clubs, whatever, you name it. I have experience in them, being both simple member or having an office inside and leading also. So from this experience, it has been my conclusion that 99 of 100 people who desire an office do so because of their lust for power. Now, I know that may sound shocking to you, but that is something I really, really have to understood over all the years. There is a small percentage, maybe it's 2% or 3%. I don't want to say numbers here which I cannot prove here. It is, of course, just life experience. But a vast number of people, the overwhelmingly vast number of people you will ever either meet in person or hear of or be under the influence of, who aspire to have a position of power. They care almost nothing about the topic at hand. It is just a means for their desire, which is in their character to boss people around. Of course, it starts with being interested, like if someone joins a political party, a liberal party, a conservative party, whatever, or if someone joins a gardening club, or a religious group, or whatever you want, of course that person is interested in the matter, most of the cases, because you cannot fake interest for a long time. You cannot join, let's say, a liberal party or a religion of sorts without being interested in the topic. So it's not entirely fake that they are there in a sense like an evil villain from a movie type. No, they're generally interested in the topic. But their desire to come to a position of power is because they enjoy bossing people around. That is, you do not do all this stuff. Let me tell you one thing. Leading is an unbelievably strenuous thing. It's absolutely exhausting. Whether you are just officer in an online guild, or leader of a religious group, or leader of a political group, trust me, or leading a part of a company, trust me, it is absolutely exhausting. It is not something that is just easy, nice and dandy. So the people, actually it is more more strenuous in itself than it is pleasurable. So the conclusion, of course, is only people who really are into this, they must get something else out of it. And what is in almost all the cases, beside really a very few number of idealists, the case is they lust bossing people around. And they don't lead you in the way like leading you to lead yourself. That was when I started to leading a spiritual group many years ago, for instance. My idea of leading was, okay, I'm organizing something, but the result should be that everyone rises up to lead himself. That was at the time my idea of leadership, empowering everyone else to lead him or herself on this way. But most people you will meet who are in any position, and it's really absolutely irrelevant if it's a gardening club or a political party, from all the way down to all the way up, these peoples have a certain, I don't know, maybe it's an inferiority complex or narcissism. I really don't know that much about psychology. It's just experience. The interpretation why this is so, I'm leaving to psychological experts. But my experience tells me, and I'm speaking here more from a perspective of a philosopher than a perspective of a scientist, that this is really the dominating factor of almost every single one who you will ever meet who is in the position of power to tell others. And the one thing, the absolutely one thing, where you can, in my very personal opinion, see and prove that crystal clearly is that the very first thing that these people do once they are in a position, they will start making rules, regulations, laws, whatever they're called. On the government level they're called laws. In a group or a club they will make rules. Now mind you, I'm no anarchist. I know rules have to exist. It's no doubt. But rules have, in my very personal opinion, to be two things. First, they have to be reasonable in a sense that everyone understands why it is necessary. And to give you one absolutely simple and clear example is the rule, you shall not kill. That's a simple rule, and everyone can understand why it is so. Because if you take down that rule, there is literally chaos, there is anarchy, there is civil war, there is murder. No one wants to be killed. That is the Confucian golden rule. Do to others what you want others to do to you. That is a rule that is simple. It is reasonable in the sense that everyone can understand the rule and everyone can understand why it is there. Do to others as you want others to do to you. That you don't need a lawyer to explain you that. You don't need an expert to explain to you why this is right or good or just or necessary or whatever. It is self-evident. Or you shall not steal. I'm going here to the Ten Commandments. It's just one example because many of the sentences are so wonderful in the sense that they make good examples. Those are rules. You don't, I mean, of course it is, in reality there is a certain authority needed to say, okay, what do you do with people who violate these rules? I mean, you can't always ad hoc organize people to look into this. You need a certain level of professional control. That is why we have lawyers, but that is why we have courts, judges, policemen. That's all fine in a modern. So if you have a village with, I don't know, 20 people, maybe you can solve things a different way. But even then, I would prefer to have professionals doing it. I'm not all too trusting into people who never dealt into these matters and suddenly they have spent all these days in the fields and suddenly they have to look into the delicate matters of law and crime. There is always a risk that this goes wrong and we have people just being killed because out of an emotional aggression rather than an impartial party who does that on a day-to-day basis. So I'm all for professionals doing this. But Ronald Reagan has once said one very interesting and I think very intelligent thing, which is, I can just paraphrase it, that a government rule or regulation is the closest thing to eternity we know on earth. Because once a government sets a rule into place, it is almost never finished. It is almost never taken down. I don't know the right phrase in English now, I'm sorry. So, and that is a reality. If you look at political programs, at laws, at regulations, they constantly just get more. And no matter how much they apparently fail to achieve what they were originally supposed to do, they always remain. And what politicians most of the time do, when they see, oh, that doesn't really reach the goal that we actually aim for, they don't take away the law, they put another on top of it. Or they alter it so it becomes bigger, broader, and covers even more. And it is this absolute hubris that these people, this type of thinking, seems to assume that we are just one more regulation away from perfection. Oh, and we haven't reached perfection with this sort of set of rules, so we need more rules and we need more regulations. And the result of this is, even if rules are reasonable in itself as a single rule, the mass of rules and regulations is now so vast now that literally almost every aspect of human life is ruled by some exterior power. And that in turn leaves us not only feeling extremely powerless, but we start to feel, or all people start to feel, more and more powerless, more and more like slaves, less and less in control of their own destiny, and more in being controlled by some exterior systems, by some exterior people. And I don't really think that is a healthy society. Now that will make one thing crystal clear to the libertarians. I count myself to a, shall we say, mild libertarian. I think that the government should rule as less as possible, but I think that the existence of government, to speak about this top level for some time, a government exists to protect us from being killed and to protect us from physical harm. And these are the two genuine and important reasons why a government exists. Because when we have no government, it is only wolf eats wolf. It is only the rule of the strong, the one with the biggest gun, the one with the biggest muscles, the one with the biggest club. And I think besides those who have the biggest muscle or the most guns, few really want such a society, because really it would be a depraved, anarchic, horrible society of violence. So the two main tasks for a government are protect my life, that I don't die, other than I'm getting old, and protect my body, that it is not harmed. The most basic function of this is, of course, police and some basic laws like you shall not kill, you shall not steal, you shall not beat someone else. But I think that also implies a basic level of social welfare. Now, living in Germany, we have here something that is called social market. And I'm very in favor of this idea, despite being mostly libertarian, because I think in a fair society, people should not fear to starve to death because they have maybe made a stupid decision. They should not be afraid to be forever harmed by an illness because their life situation does not allow them to pay a doctor. I think that is the logical extension of the idea that a government is there to protect you from physical harm. Because if you starve, you are most definitely physically harmed. Because if you are ill, like you caught a really serious illness, and you can't afford medical treatment, then you are very seriously harmed. So I think, despite my libertarian basic ideas, the idea of a basic healthcare, the idea of a basic welfare are always implied in the idea of government. Because being physically harmed, whether by accident of an illness or by bad fortune of losing my job, that is physically harming me, just the same as someone would beat me or someone would shoot me. You may say you have been stupid, you have spoken up against your boss and now he's firing you. Damn it, your own fault. You could have just shut up. But I think stupidity is not a valid reason to let someone die. I mean, if we take that as let's just say that it was his fault that he's unemployed now. I still think we cannot let someone die just because he spoke up against his boss or he made one stupid decision. We can say, okay, you have to take some consequences, but I think a basic social support to the level that physical harm is avoided is an absolute logical necessity that comes from the idea what government is for in the first place, and it is preventing physical harm. Anything else is negotiable. And anything else like infrastructure, we can debate about what sort of infrastructure we all put money together to build bridges, or put money together to say, okay, we want safe and good roads or clean water or whatever. That is something that I, as someone who truly believes in democracy, say, okay, these are things open for debate. Let's make votes about these things. I'm very in favor of the Swiss model of direct democracy. And that is where the government does not just get elected every 4 or 5 years, and then within these 4 or 5 years they can essentially do whatever they please, because usually they don't do that what the majority of people want. But we have to have some binding of authority. We need to make sure that those in authority are bound to their word that was given, that they cannot promise us stuff at the election day and then after the election day they do whatever the hell they please. So we have some laws or some regulation or some mechanism that ensures, okay, President X got into the election by promising, I don't know, I will do away with Guantanamo Bay. Just one example that was in the recent elections a topic, and then don't. I think that a politician who promises something must be obligated to then do what he promised. Or if he says, okay, the circumstances changed in this and that way, he has to put it directly to the vote of the people. Like when he said, okay, I think Obama promised to close down Guantanamo Bay, to stay with this example. No matter how your personal opinion it is, it's just he promised it and said, that's what I want to do. And people who elected him, in part, elected him because he said that. For other reasons too, but let's just take it with that one example. And then he went into office, and I don't know if he said it, but he didn't. It still existed. At least until recently, or still, I think still. He didn't close it. So, if he learned something new, like, okay, now that I'm the president, there is some things I learned that I didn't know before, so we can't close it. Maybe that is the case, but then he has to go to the people and say, okay, we'll make a referendum. Shall it be closed or shall it be opened? Or maybe a third options like some stay, some remain, or like if they are terrorists, we bring them to a real court, which would be my suggestion, because I believe in due process for everyone. Even people we absolutely do not like it, even people who absolutely want to overthrow our system, because if we do not grant the law to everyone, if someone is a terrorist, if someone actually wanted to overthrow our system, we can bring him before court, and then the judge, or maybe the jury, I'm not so fond of juries, but then the court in its system says, okay, this man is guilty of trying to kill people and or killing people and planning terrorist attacks and trying to overthrow the government of the United States of America or whatever. And say, okay, this goes against law, this. And then we have a fair process and a fair trial and sentence. That is what should be done. And if there are reasons that we cannot do that, like dissolving Guantanamo Bay, like Mr. Obama, when he was candidate, promised he would do, he should go to the people and say, okay, we make a referendum because the facts have changed, they are so, that are the reasons I can't close it down, but you, the people, are law, as the Latin saying goes, vox populi, vox Dei, and then we do that what the majority decides. That is what happens in Swiss, and I'm very much in favor of this, because they have minimized the authority and said, okay, in any important cases there are very easy ways for the people to start referendums about any sort of things, and they are not influenced by the people in power, but the people debate among themselves. There are no fear-mongering debates. And one very negative example of this is the current Brexit. You know that the British people are in a few weeks making a referendum whether or not to leave the European Union. And that is a good idea in itself. But the problem that comes here is that the people in authority make a fear-mongering of an absolutely irrational level. Like Mr. Cameron, who is for staying in the European Union, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Mr. Cameron, said that if Britain leaves the European Union, there is danger of a third world war. That is absolutely what he suggested might be the risk. And the same Mrs. Merkel about a similar topic. Ms. Merkel, when here in Germany we have had many bailouts that the German taxpayers paid a lot of money, and some wanted to make referendums about this. And Ms. Merkel said two things. She said, first, if the euro breaks, Europe will break. She meant the European Union, but says Europe. If the euro fails as a currency, the European Union will fail, and if the European Union will fail, we'll have war. War. That is a threat level that is absolutely absurd. And I think if we design a really modern structured democracy, in any referendum, the people in power should be forced to shut the fuck up. Because they have their agenda. They want to stay in power, they want to direct things, and they will never just neutrally comment on things. We absolutely have to leave the people in power out of any referendum debate, because they will always be tempted to make the absolute ludicrous fear-mongering, like Mr. Cameron insisting that leaving the European Union will lead to World War III, or like Ms. Merkel saying that not bailing out the Greeks or the Greece banks will lead to a European war. Those suggestions are ludicrous, and intellectually everyone knows that it is ludicrous, but still people are unfortunately not entirely rational beings. Humans are always coerced by fear, especially by fear of change. It is the nature of humans, unfortunately, that they rather prefer a bad status quo which they know over an uncertain possible improvement. That is why I think a lot of people from Scotland voted against the referendum to leave the United Kingdom. They were just afraid. They didn't want to take the risk of forming their own country, and it wasn't really being convinced of staying in the United Kingdom either from my point of view. It was just that there was so much fear-mongering that, oh, you will be poor, nobody knows what your destiny is, you were so long in it, you can't do it for yourself. And this fear-mongering, I am glad that Scotland stayed in the United Kingdom, don't mind that, but the point I'm making is how people are manipulated into believing, and that is the other point of authority. The authority that does not come from the office itself, but from influencing people by speaking, by fear-mongering people into believing something. And this really is something where only the individual, we have to be more alert. We have to make ourselves thinking more skeptical. And one of the big ironies about this entire debate, especially in America, but also more and more here in Western Europe, is that there is a group of people who call themselves liberal, in the broadest sense. They speak for fighting for liberty. They speak for fighting for freedom, for diversity, which sounds wonderful, but if you ever confront any one of these, you know it's a blatant, big, fat lie. Because if you study how these people, one group, especially they call themselves social justice warriors or social justice followers, and if you honestly follow their doings, you will know they are the most intolerant, hateful, aggressive, bullying people that live in the Western society at this time. And this is, see, if they were conservatives or reactionaries or authoritarians and would speak for society of authority, it would at least make sense. I would still be against it, but it would at least be consistent with what they're preaching. But these people are the greatest hypocrites that you can possibly imagine, because they speak, oh, we want open dialogue, we want a free society, we are for freedom of speech. But what you say is absolutely forbidden. And the reality is they don't want freedom of speech. They want freedom from speech. And you see that nowhere more clearly than in the entire educational and university system. It is already very rampant in the United States, but it already has come over to Europe and especially to Germany as well. I have followed similar debates in university here and read about this, where people were silenced, where people were told, oh, shut the fuck up, you're not allowed to criticize Islam, for instance. You're not allowed to question the current direction gender mainstreaming has gone. You're not allowed to criticize anything that these social justice wars and leftists hold dear. I'm sorry to make it clear. There is only one authority I accept, and that is reason. Logic based on scientific facts. Either you have scientific waterproof facts or you don't. And the point is, you can't find facts, you can't generate logic, scientific truths without a debate. It's not possible. We are not God-given prophets who can just sit in our chambers and write something and I say, I don't know, this and this is like that, and you all just have to blindly swallow. That is how religion follows. You know, I'm a religious spiritual person myself. I have beliefs which are absolutely irrational, which are not logical, which are not scientifically proven or provable. But they are just my beliefs. I do it, I practice it, I believe it for myself. And if you think that's absolutely hilarious what you believe, and they say, okay, fine, so you believe something else, believe nothing at all. It doesn't matter to me. If you're an agnostic, if you are atheist, if you are Christian, if you are what the hell ever, I don't care as long as you let me practice and believe and pray the way I do and what I do. I'm not telling me that I'm a heretic or an idiot or whatever. And I say, this, you can believe into irrational things, but for yourself. That is also liberty. But as soon as we start a debate about something that others are obliged to adhere, I want to base things on logic, reason, and scientific proof. Like, for instance, multiculturalism. There are scientific studies that prove that the more multicultural society is, the more it falls apart. And the people who have brought these studies are themselves liberal lefts. They were shocked by the results of their studies and their findings. But all the evidence, or if we have gender mainstreaming, yes, the gender identity is to a certain degree malleable. It is not something set in stone. That is true. There is no black and white male, female. That is scientifically proven. That this is a matter of fashion, of what the times. At sometimes the ideal of manhood is more macho, at others it is more feminine. These things change with time and era. But there is a basic identity which is in the hormones, in the genes, in the biological nature of a man and a woman. Now, certainly there are always exceptions. There are people which are, for some whatever reason, biology got mixed up. But by and large, there is such a thing as manly and womanly, or however you want to name it, and this is not changeable in all possible directions. It is not just a black box into which you can put everything. And this is also a proven fact. So just presuming that it is absolutely malleable and that a gender character can be formed into any possible thing is scientific hogwash. It is absolutely hogwash. It is not true and disproven. So if someone comes to me and argues with the feminism 3.0 idea that gender is just a black box which can be anything, then that person tells a scientific disproven lie. And I'm not even arguing with people who usually knowingly ignore scientific facts or distort them in a way which absolutely is hilariously illogical. And this is the only authority I can accept, is reason based on scientific proven facts. And we all have to be more aware of this. And the fear I have is, I always feared, or fear is a little bit harsh, I always suspected that at a time our very free society, which we have from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, would slip back into a more authoritarian society. And I see that strong and acceleratingly fast happening around us. And the irony, or the sad thing is, as I want to see it, that the heralds of destroying liberty are those who having the word liberty on their flag. The social justice warriors. They are not bringing liberty. They are enforcing irrational quasi-religious systems upon us, which have no fundament in scientific proof, and let alone in free will of the people at all. It is a religious or pseudo-religious ideology they are spreading. And they have all the hallmarks of a person coming from an authoritarian sect. They yell you down. It is impossible to even discuss in a normal way. And this aggressive emotional frenzy in which these social justice warriors and lefties fall is the most frightening and disturbing thing to watch. If you watch any university debate in the United States where a conservative or a libertarian or even someone from their own, like a feminist or the old school feminist, speaks and says this modern 3.0 feminism is going too far, the way these people react, they are not saying, oh, I see this different because X, Y, Z reasons. They yell like someone had stabbed them with a knife. They throw a tantrum like a 5-year-old child who dropped his popsicle or his ice cream. They go into an aggressive frenzy. They throw stuff at them. Eggs, watermelons, even more dangerous objects, and even an egg, if you get it in your eye, it can blind you. And the leftist media, they don't write about this, oh, this is horrible. Like, take one example from recent times, a Donald Trump fan. Now you can say, I don't like a word that Donald Trump is saying. I'm not going to vote him, and anything he says and has in his program is absolutely what I'm against. That is, in a free society, of course, your prerogative. And you have the right to protest against this. And protest means you can do two things. You can stand and hold up a sign, or you can chant something. That is protest. But if you start throwing objects at people who support Trump, you are not a protester, you are terrorizing people. You are terrorizing them by fear. And we have the same here in Germany. We have a conservative party called the AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, Alternative for Germany. And no matter, I don't like all the things they say. I like some and I dislike others. So my opinion about them is about 50-50. So you can say yes, I agree with them, or you can say no, I don't agree with anything they say. That's fine. That's part of liberty and democracy. But what happens here more and more is that people are threatened with personal violence, like someone who had a restaurant or cafe or bar or something, and a handful of members of the AfD party wanted to gather there just to chat in that restaurant, talk about stuff. And the person owning that restaurant was threatened by mails, we are going to harm you and we're going to torch down your house and destroy your property if you leave these people in your restaurant. And when he did, they threw color at his house and they wrote, Nazis are eating here, outside painted that on his house, and there were people whose cars were burned down and whose property was destroyed, and some were even physically attacked. And that is terror. That is the reign of terror. That is the very opposite of all liberty and reason, no matter how justified you feel in your view. If you start to bully people, if you start to threaten people, if you start to act in such an aggressive manner that this person must be afraid to speak up. Some are even losing their jobs here in Germany. There was a teacher who was meeting with people from the AfD and he lost his job just for meeting people in a allowed political party. If that political group was forbidden, I could understand and saying, oh, that teacher has meeting an illegal group. But that political party, like it or not, is on the ground of democracy, is on the ground of the German constitution. So if you join that group, you shouldn't lose your job for that. That is absolutely hilarious. That is marching straight into dictatorship. And this is really the most unbelievable thing going on, both in America as here in Germany, in some other parts of Europe too, like I know from Sweden, they have the same absolutely ludicrous oppression of people who are not with the liberal lefty zeitgeist. And this is truly frightening me. This is truly, I must say, it's actually frightening me more right now at the moment than the prospect of the possible rise of Sharia law in Europe. As dangerous and as possible, I really see that not now, not in 5 years, but I think it is really a possible danger that within Western Europe, within the next decades or century, there might rise a Sharia law. And I'm not going to touch this topic right now, because that would be something really for another day. But it is this other side, this so-called political correctness, this so-called social justice. They are not for justice at all. And social justice is interesting than the least, because there would be a plethora of other things you can do for social justice, or for justice at all. For instance, there is the good old-fashioned social democratic model, where you say, okay, I want healthcare that no one must die because he caught an illness. They'll have a basic social money support so people don't starve to death. I'm all for that. And one topic where this becomes relatively clear, the difference between them and what I think is true justice, is the matter of minorities. I'm a minority myself, I'm a gay man. What I want is a society where there is no law that oppresses me. That, for me, is liberty. When, let's say, take for example, in the society of the United States, in the past, black people were oppressed by the law. Black people were not allowed to marry white people. Black people were confined to certain areas to sit in a bus. You American listeners will know this much better than I. This was oppression through the law, and it was right to fight against that government oppression. It was right to fight for law which declares the equality and the equal rights for everyone. That black people and gay people and Jews and women and whatever you want all have the same rights. For instance, the right to vote. In earlier times, women didn't have the right to vote, and it was right. And of course I support the idea that women have the right to vote, or everyone has the right to vote and to candidate and to have his say and to has the same opportunity like everyone else. That is freedom. And when that was reached, the debate about blacks and gays and women was over. But the problem is, these people, I don't know, they are either bored or they are seeking a crusade or whatever. And suddenly they want the government to enforce that they have equal places everywhere. Like a quota, like this company does have to be forced by the government to have as much women as men, have as much blacks, as much gay people, as much Jewish people, I don't know, whatever you want, like there is in society. And that is not liberty. That is dictatorship. That is the government telling private people in their private company whom to employ. That is not liberty. And you cannot have anything that is justice if you do not have the liberty to decide. It means that you have the equal chance to have it. But if someone, let's say I'm a gay man and I make a restaurant and I'm employing only gay people, of course that would be a nasty thing to do. Maybe it would even be a stupid thing to do, but it is my restaurant and I can employ the fuck whoever I want. If I, as a gay man, only want to be surrounded by gay employees, as long as I do not harass them, of course, I should be able to do this. And if a white guy or a black guy or a Chinese guy only hires people of their own race, I would find that stupid and I would find it morally nasty. But I would not find that against the law. I would not expect the government to step in and control this, because it still is his private restaurant or company or whatever the heck it is. That too is liberty to say, no, I don't like these people. It's my prerogative not to like these. It's my prerogative to say I hate gay people and I don't want them in my company. I would be sad that it is so, and I would try to convince people, hey, we are not bad. We are just as hardworking and we are not infecting you with gayness. I would try to argue with them with reason, with arguments, with logic, with talking to them. But the last thing I want is the government stepping in and forcing that person to employ me. That's not liberty, that's authoritarian. Okay, I see the timer is already 45 minutes plus I'm speaking here, and I'm leaving you with these thoughts. I don't have any witty or hope-giving finishing here for this, but I hope you stay faithful and no, not faithful, skeptical. You stay skeptical, of course, but faithful to listening to what I have to say. And if you have something to say, whether it's pro or contra, just remember to be polite and comment down in the video what you think. Stay safe.